Okay, it's 4:30 and we'll call to order the Dunn County Judicial and Law Committee. First thing we'll do is call the roll, and we do have a new member here, so I'll just have you each call out your name. So we'll start first with Agnes Welsh.
There we go. Agnes Welsh. And I was sworn in just a week and a half ago, I think, as County Board Supervisor. That's it.
I'm Don Jetson. I've got District 10 in the county, which is the western section from Knapp down to Weston area. So. Oh, it was honest.
Tom Gilbert, District 25.
And then Luke Wilsey, District 8.
Carl Vandermillen, District 19, which is just south of the campus.
Okay, next item, approval of the minutes. Tom makes a motion, Carl seconds. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next up, number 4, public comments, and we do have a public comment. And would you state your name and address? Thank you. Oh, 1 second. We'll turn.
Okay.
Yep.
My name is Cecilia Cooper. I live at E4627 453rd Avenue, Menominee, Wisconsin. That's in the Hog Ridge subdivision just south on Highway 25. I'm here to comment today on an incident that happened April 9th in our subdivision. There were reports of gunshots, and my daughter-in-law called me as we were driving home out of concern for my safety, as she was not able to connect with us on her initial phone call. There were multiple police officers in the area. Neighbors have indicated that they've seen a mother and her 2 children evacuated to a police squad. The neighborhood is understandably very tense after this particular incident. And although several of our members have tried to get further clarification as to whether or not this represents a security risk for the neighborhood, we've not been successful in getting much information. So basically, I'm here to request that we could be provided with more information. I think for me personally, one thing that would make a huge difference for me is knowing whether or not this was an armed intrusion or not, because that makes a difference in terms of the level of security the people in our neighborhood would need to observe. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other public comments? Okay, we'll move on to staff reports. And first up is emergency management.
I really don't have anything new to add to my actual report. I think the only thing that I have for extra discussion is on the agenda on a separate line item, unless you have any questions about my report.
Yep, go ahead, Carl.
Is this the first time any of us can remember that you're fully staffed?
Well, we're not quite fully staffed. We're above minimum. For the first time in several years. I think it's been close to probably 7 years since we've been fully staffed, but it's been 3 since we have been above minimum staffing. So it has been a long time, and it actually feels okay. I'm not going to say it feels great, as Friday I ended up working close to 20 hours, trying to fill a couple different shifts, and then had kind of a tower situation in the middle of that. So I think there's still room for some improvement in our staffing, but it's much, much better than what it was. So it feels better, but not great.
Yep, go ahead.
I was also curious, it looks like you get about 3 times as many non-emergency calls as emergency calls. I'm just curious what those typical non-emergency calls are.
And that can, it definitely varies as to what those calls are. It could be, a neighbor disagreement which hasn't escalated, to the situation where they actually need to dial 911 if they have questions about, we had a call today about a question about an above ground pool, so they want to call law enforcement to see what the ordinances or the regulations are on that, barking dogs, things like that. That's probably a lot of our non-emergent phone calls that come in. Some of them are just transfers to like possibly the sheriff's office, or to a deputy or a police officer's voicemail, but a lot of them are probably non-emergency complaints, and like I said, those do vary quite a bit, but yeah, that's where they all come from.
Do you get potential suicide calls?
We have, I mean, it just depends, and those come in on emergency and non-emergency lines. I was working the other morning and took a call on the Menominee Police Department phone line, and not that it matters what it came in on, but it was a Menominee Police Department non-emergency line of a lady that was, really hysterical and, upset about a road rage incident that had started in Eau Claire County, went all the way on I-94 to exit 45 where they exited. This person kind of followed her around a little bit, that exit 45 area, then followed her up to double B. And, she was very hysterical. And, after we were into this situation, I said, ma'am, next time this happens, you need to call 911 when it's happening, not, after you've driven for 20 some minutes with this person following you. So sometimes it just depends. I mean, you never know when the phone rings. It can be an emergency on a non-emergency line, and it definitely can be a non-emergency on a 911 line. And, sometimes we do offer advice as, you're tying up our emergency line for a non-emergency call. Please hang up and call us back on this non-emergency line. So it just depends. You just never know. Mhm.
I know when I did the tour there, somebody called because they had a flat tire. So. Okay, moving on. Medical examiner Marcy is not going to be here today. Any questions on her report? If not, we'll move on to the sheriff's office.
Not much to add to my report other than I included a quote that we got for removing the 25-year-old carpet in our cell blocks and stuff. And I concluded that in my report. The total to do the entire facility was $266,000, which I don't have the money in my budget to do in jail assessment funds. And but we had him sharpen his pencil and tell us basically what he could do for removing the carpet and putting an epoxy type flooring down. And so we're looking at moving forward with that. This year I've got $85,000 in expenditures budgeted out of the jail assessment funds. So I don't have that much money, total money in my jail assessment funds anyhow. So we're going to have to piecemeal this, but try and get, that carpet that the jail inspector's been encouraging us to get rid of for years now out of there, and put more of a sanitary flooring down in the different blocks. So looks like we're going to move forward with the north kind of half of the jail. If you look at that building, the pods and dorms on the north half, and then the 2-person cells. And then wait until next year, and then until there's more money in the jail assessment funds to do the south half. But at least we'll get started on the project. but happy to answer any questions you may have.
Square footage. Usually flooring would be, sorry, I didn't get one. Yeah, square footage. His quote was dollar amounts, but
Right.
first time I've ever seen a floor quote that didn't have square footage.
Yeah, and I don't know, obviously did I include that in the report? Oh yeah, it was part of the other attachments. Yeah, he must have taken, if you look at the quote, it's, pods A and F, pods A, B, C, and D.
Yep.
And then the rec area. So I assume he was there and took measurements, but didn't include the square footage on the estimate for some reason.
Makes it harder to compare that way.
Right.
Go ahead, Carl.
You noted, there was, concern in your report about mixing classifications. I'm just curious what those classifications are.
Simplest way to explain it is you don't want to put shark or minnows in with sharks. When you have somebody in jail for a minor offense, you don't want them in with homicide suspects or major drug dealers. If somebody's a substance abuse or substance user, they go through a classification when they're booked into jail of, their criminal history, things like that, of what they've been involved in their past, to give them a classification. If they're violent offenders with a criminal history, you try and keep minor offenses separate from major homicide suspects and stuff like that. So you don't, if you put minnows in with sharks, eventually you're going to have all sharks. It's kind of the theory, and you can make a bad apple out of somebody that normally wouldn't go that direction. So you keep them with other minor offenses and then major offenses in like a maximum security area.
Any other questions? Okay. We're gonna move on to courts and Katie.
The only additional thing is I'm going to do interviews this Friday for our part-time deputy clerk position. We had 8 applicants, 4 got referred to me, so we're going to do all 4 interviews on Friday and hopefully get somebody hired for the position. Otherwise, if there's questions, otherwise we don't have anything else to add.
All right, we'll move on to CJCC.
Nothing further to add unless there's questions.
Looks like none. Thank you. Next is District Attorney, Andrea.
And nothing further to add. If happy to answer any questions.
Looks like no questions, so we'll move on to child support and Josie.
Hello. So I provided an update on the Department of Treasury federal tax offset processing error that was discovered in February. The state was able to gather a report of the impacted payers, 7 of which had cases in Dunn County, which doesn't seem like a lot, 7 people. But the amount that those 7 people are certified for federal tax intercept program is over $136,000 of unpaid child support between the 7 of them. So the fact that those custodial parents, some of them are used to only receiving child support once a year through, tax intercept. And I think we're going to have some disappointed people this year. The support is still owed. The money is still due. There's always next year, I guess. But this year the IRS just forgot to intercept the money. That was it. Unless anybody has any questions.
Looks like none. Thank you, Josie. Item 6, place at the request of the chair. Melissa, do you want, if you guys want to stick around the other departments to hear this, otherwise you're free to leave, so. Presentation by Chris Straight, on hazard mitigation plan, so.
Good evening. My name's Chris Straight, for those I haven't met, with the Regional Planning Commission. For those that don't know, Regional Planning Commissions are units of government. So we serve a 7-county area: St. Croix, Polk, Dunn, Barron, Chippewa, Eau Claire, and Clark. 3 members of your board are on our commission, our board of directors, if you will. So we have 3 times 7 counties, 21-member commission. And we exist to provide support to our counties, to our cities, villages. One of the things we're doing right now is updating your comprehensive plan. Another thing I've been doing since I've been with the regional planning a little over 20 years now is putting together these mitigation plans. And so I've got kind of 3 parts to this. First, I want to give you a big picture of what this mitigation planning effort's all about, real briefly. And then get into a little bit about the status of this grant, that the planning grant that funds these plans. And that's really kind of your next agenda item. And then, if you indulge me, I'd like to talk a little bit about, since I'm here, talk a little bit about the plan update in some more detail. What are some of the risks that you're concerned with? A little homework for you. You were identified, and you've always been in the past, the steering committee. This committee has been the steering committee for these plan updates. So I work with you. We usually have 4 to 5 meetings. This was originally scheduled to be our initial meeting, our kickoff, where I'd be an hour and a half with you all, if you allow. I'd be bouncing things past you, getting your input, and helping select. There's some homework in between the meetings. Help us select and prioritize what are those strategies. But we're kind of on hold as a project as a whole, due to the funding. And so I'll come back to that. So as far as mitigation plans, so what are these? These are identifying strategies. Mitigation is part of that emergency management cycle, right? So you got preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. Mitigation are you're identifying strategies to reduce or prevent the impacts from a disaster event. FEMA's guidelines for mitigation planning, you need to focus on the natural hazards. The county, last few times, we've included non-natural. So it's up to each county. Chippewa County focused just on natural. All the others in the region right now include non-natural. And I'll talk about what hazards you've included in a bit here. These plans are prerequisite. So what's the carrot here? So they're a prerequisite for certain FEMA grant dollars, in particular the what's called the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant, the BRIC program. That has been cut by FEMA. They're rescinding it. The plan is to come up with a new approach to mitigation. So that replaced what was called the pre-disaster. So that's the pre-event grant. There's something called the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP. That's anytime there's a disaster declaration anywhere in the state of Wisconsin, state gets some dollars for mitigation projects. And it's a little less competitive. State's got a little bit more flexibility for those. It could be a tornado down in Dane County, and they can use the dollars up here should they choose. So it's the HMGP, the BRIC, the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, FMA. There's another one of those grant programs for flood projects, bio to flood prone structures, elevating of structures, flood proofing, things like that. Could be studies, hydrological analysis, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a high hazard dam program. Excel isn't eligible because they're a private sector, but if it's a public high hazard dam, there's potential grants there. And then those are the big FEMA projects for our region, but there's certain state programs as well. A pre-disaster flood resiliency grant program, the Wisconsin Emergency Management just implemented last fall. So that's a new one. Now that is also has a prerequisite to have one of these plans in place. The plans are intended to be updated every 5 years. To date, and it's about 20 years now, these plans have been around. We brought in almost 20 million. I think it's a little over almost 19 million in grants to the region. The biggest grants are for storm shelters or safe rooms. Some of the schools, Luck, Abbotsford, have used these to build new gyms that are safe rooms for the community. Northern Wisconsin State Fairgrounds, we did one up there in Chippewa Falls. A lot of flood mitigation, flood buyout, especially over in Eau Claire County. A lot of that, if you've ever been down to Phoenix Park area, there used to be residential down that way. And so they bought out those homes with the agreement of those landowners. But you can also do flood proofing, flood elevation. Many communities have done some of that. One related program here one related project here in Dunn County was a revetment project along a stream. The house was going to fall, I think it was in the Red Cedar. And so they did landslide prevention to prevent that from happening. So that was one of your big grants. You haven't tapped into these as a county. We haven't seen a lot of grants over this way. We'd love to change that. Some of our electric co-ops bury power lines with these dollars. And so I always meet with, Dunn Energy down the road here. And then just planning, education, distribution of weather radios. A nice thing about these grants, the local match is typically 25%. And that can include in kind. So we've got like a $1.8 million grant award for a new mobile home, safe room at a mobile home park over in Altoona, biggest safe mobile home park in our region. And because the land values are pretty high right now in Altoona, the out of pocket is like $60,000, $1.8 million project, because we use that value of that land as part of that grant match. And then if it's a rural, low income community, we can bring that match down to maybe 10% for many of our smaller communities that meet those eligibility criteria. And so that's the advantage to them. Of course, you can't just stick a old trailer into a hill and call it a safe room. So you need to build these to FEMA standards. So they're not cheap. So you're gonna they can run. Last I looked, it was somewhere $275,000 or $270 to $300 per square foot for just a standard safe room. And there no bells and whistles on these things. But if the tornado hits, if you've ever seen pictures, those will be standing. You build them to 250, 275 mile per hour wind load and such. Anyway, so the county, we put together the county level plan. The county adopts, covers all the unincorporated towns and the county to be eligible for the grant dollars. We meet with each city and village, they adopt, and then they are eligible. I've always had UW Stout have a certain subsection, had them adopt. And this time around, we were going to reach out to all the schools and public education institutions in the county and ask them to participate, CBTC and such, and as well as the public schools. And that way they can also pursue the grants directly rather than going through the county or a city or village for the grant application. Anything to add big picture on the grant or the project planning in general? Yeah, so these are big plans. These aren't like real accessible to the public. We can stand up web pages or do like a summary, but FEMA's got like a 15-page checklist. And so they can run anywhere from 300 to 500 pages by the time we get through it all, with each community having their own little sub-plan as an appendix. I saw one for Portage County the other day, was like 800 pages. So they're beasts. And I think I said they're supposed to be updated every 5 years. What we've ran into is at the end of March, FEMA issued made an announcement that they've essentially ended that BRIC program. So HMGP is still out there. Flood mitigation assistance is out there. The dam grant program is still out there. It hasn't changed that. And it didn't change. There's another wildfire program, but we don't tap into that around here. So those programs still exist. The plans are still required for those programs. FEMA updated their planning guidance for plans. They waived, I should say, and removed climate change, they removed socially vulnerable populations and made some tweaks, but they didn't say we are getting rid of the plans. And so as far as we know, the plans are still required for these other grants as well as that state grant, but FEMA is going to take a new approach to mitigation and replace the BRIC grant program with something else. Right now, we don't know what's gonna happen with the BRIC grants that have been approved since 2020. Years were approved under the federal fiscal year 2023. They did make the announcement that every application that went in this spring, which would have been federal fiscal year 2024, they just said, nope, we're not accepting them. And that went also for the flood mitigation assistance program, I've heard. So there's 600 million set aside for those flood projects, and they also stopped those. So no more BRIC for now. But you've seen some things with the federal government kind of have been changing. There's been a lot of political pressure on them. Last we've heard in terms of these projects that have been funded is that we will be able to complete fully obligated projects unless they haven't started construction. This is a planning effort. So we don't know exactly whether we will be able to move forward with this project with the grant funding or not. I'm still hopeful. I'm kind of like 60% yay and 40% maybe not at this point. We're asking for clarity. State, Wisconsin Emergency Management's asking for clarity. We're just waiting for that list of projects. But in the interim, I worked with Jason to put in a request for grant drawdown, just to demonstrate that the project is moving forward. We put in our quarterly report showing we have progress on this. And so I think we're going to be okay. 60%, 40. Yeah, I'm not confident. So, what are the options? And I think you've talked to the group about that. One is, well, I suggest not doing anything until we hear back. You have a while to update this plan before it expires towards the end of this year. And so I would just sit on it for a while, let FEMA clarify whether it's going to be funded under the grant. If it's not funded under the grant, maybe the state will, WEM will step up and find other pool of dollars. They've got HMGP out there, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program dollars. If there's a tornado somewhere tonight and there's a disaster declaration somewhere, those I was hoping it wouldn't happen, right? Yeah, not knocking, hoping. Yeah. Anyway, so that could change. Or if there's no state or federal grant dollars, then we're updating right now, Clark and Chippewa and yours kind of concurrently at the same time. We'll go back to you all and put together a proposal to look at doing something very scaled back, meet those minimum requirements, see how quickly we can just update it and check the boxes for FEMA. And so we'll put a proposal back to you, and then you can decide, can staff do it? And in that proposal, maybe it'll be a bit a la carte, and maybe there'll be some things we'll say, well, if the county staff can do this, then that'll leave us more time to knock off these other things. So we want to work with you all to figure that out. Otherwise, yeah, you're always welcome to do it on your own too. Yeah. Or you just kind of put it aside and just see what happens. Any questions? That all kind of makes sense. If none, I'm going to move to that third part of my part here, if you don't mind. First, I've got a sign-in sheet. Your time at these meetings can be on towards the grant match. So I'd love to sign in. Then there's the last two columns. I think I have round trip under there. Yeah, so I'm asking you your miles round trip roughly and your travel time roughly round trip. Because I can count that towards the grant match should this move forward as a grant project. And so if you can help me out with the homework there, then I'll go this way around. Got two little things. One is, if you don't mind before you leave, get a chance to fill out. I got the little carpal tunnel thing going on. It's sort of a issues and opportunities. So it's a quick idea brainstorming. I invite the crowd to do it as well. Oh, sorry. Speaking to the speaker here. Yeah, I'd invite the crowd to do it as well. Yeah, are there disaster, emergency management related issues, things that got you concerned? And are there opportunities, resources? And just, you can write down one, you can write down two, and I'll collect them before I leave.
Just for clarification,
Yes.
we don't care about Chippewa County. It'd be for Dunn County.
Did I have Chip on
Yeah.
there yet? Okay, I'm sorry. Ouch. Yeah, I replaced it at the top, didn't I? Oh, shoot. Sorry. Yes, this is for Dunn County. And hopefully this all says Dunn County as well. So this is homework for the committee to take home. If you can get it back to myself or Jason, I'd appreciate it when I hand this out. And I invite staff to participate as well. But I want to explain this before I leave you. Let you get a copy in front of you. And we can distribute this through email. I'm not sure if there's people online attending or anybody. Okay. If there's other committee members not here, we can get their input. One of the committee's roles is to help us, big picture, identify what hazards need to be in the plan, and then give us a sense of how important they are to address. And this is one tool we use to do this. This checks a box for FEMA. And so you can see different kinds of hazards. There's natural hazards. You got the overland or overbank flooding, like on the Red Cedar, getting into that 100-year floodplain plus. Then the overland stormwater flooding. That's the flash flooding that's coming down the storm sewers, or there's no place for it to go and you're washing out roads, or you're having a lot of basement flooding problems. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. They got the technological hazards. These are hazmat spills, fixed meaning at industrial sites or at school facilities or something like that, fixed sites. Then transportation, rail, highway, groundwater contamination, animal waste management, long-term power outage, nuclear plant incident. Probability on that's probably going to be pretty darn low because we've not had one. Vulnerability, maybe a little higher. We are in the ingestion pathway zone, meaning if there is a release, it could impact agricultural product around here in particular. And then other hazards, pandemic, zoonotic disease, avian flu would be under the next one perhaps. However, pandemics, COVID, so probability, maybe a little higher than it was last time I met with you all, right? Active threats, active shooter, workplace violence, terrorism, cyber attacks, etc. So probability, what I'm looking for you to do, just using your gut, 0 to 5. If it happens all the time, it's going to be closer to that 4 or 5. If it hasn't happened, it's going to be closer to that 0 to 1. Then there's the vulnerability. That's the impact should it occur. So thunderstorms, right? We have 5-ish thunderstorms, severe thunderstorm events a year, maybe even a little bit more. Probability, probably getting up there. That's pretty high. Vulnerability, though, for most of those events happen without a lot of impacts. You might have a little localized flooding, might have some hail damage, things like that. So vulnerability is going to be lower. Tornadoes, probably the flip of that, right? Tornado events, you're averaging about 2.2 a year. So lower than the severe thunderstorms. Vulnerability, if a tornado hits, it's going to be pretty high, right? So then there's that green column. That was something FEMA calls the National Risk Index. That's comparing you to the national averages for these things in terms of risk, probability, vulnerability, and also community resiliency to these. Extreme cold, that tends to be, we're higher around here for extreme cold and ice storms than most of the nation. You know, river flooding, very low in Dunn County, according to FEMA relative to other places. That doesn't mean river flooding isn't important to you, though. So that's just kind of in there in part to check one of those FEMA boxes. That HVA, that's coming from your public health offices in your hospitals. That's the health vulnerability assessment. So there's the Northwest HERC Health Emergency Readiness Coalition, I think they're called, something like that. And they do their own assessment. So that's how those folks rated. What's number one in their concerns? Cyber attack. Why? HIPAA rules, exposing customer data. Right? So that makes sense. But they're a little biased. They're not necessarily representing the whole community. They're representing that health sector. But good stuff. The next two columns is really talking about, was it in your last plan? So the ones that have X's in the last plan or have X's there were in the last plan. And that last column shows you where we addressed them, what section. So we had this brief hazardous materials section that we talked about fixed and transportation related vulnerabilities and spills, and to anything related to groundwater contamination in the context of a hazmat spill. We didn't address nitrates. That's not a disaster. However, if you had a hazmat spill that impacted groundwater, that would be within the scope of that. And so the last plan, we were heavy on the natural hazards, and then we had brief sections for hazmat, nuclear power, active threats, active shooter, and communicable disease that largely just referenced other plans. Like you have a public health emergency preparedness plan with the required 15 components. So instead of duplicating that in this plan, we referred to that other plan. Same goes for some of those, like I said, nuclear, Prairie Island does their training. They have all kinds of plans. Your emergency management participates in those. So that, and so this, by mid-May, if you're able to put it, do that and sit down watching basketball or something, 01554, we'd appreciate it.
Who do we turn this into, you said? To you?
Yeah, just
Okay.
just send it to me.
Oh,
And I'll get it to Jason.
Oh, okay.
Easier.
Whatever works for you all.
Yep.
By when?
Mid-May.
Yeah, I threw May 15th in there.
Yeah.
It's not a priority. And then if this process does move forward, I'd be back with you again. If you need to schedule a special meeting, you've got a busy agenda, because I'm going to need some time with you to talk about this.
So our next meeting is May 19th. Would that be appropriate? if
Just
we-
bring them then.
Then? Okay.
Perfect. Yeah,
That's perfect.
that's perfect. One quick question, Chris. Just want to clarify, like you said, oh, we could just wait because we have a little bit of time to complete this plan. Like how long? Luke and Chris Corpola, our county administrator, and Dan Dunbar, we had a side meeting and just kind of talked about like the steps that we would have to take if Dunn County ends up having to fund us or wants to fund this themselves. And it was kind of like, well, we'd have to push it forward for at least the county board approval. So what, May or June? And I think this is due the end of October. So just kind of wondering, like, how long do you think we need to be patient and wait before we need to start making a decision? Like, do we not do it? Do we do it ourselves? Is it kind of a hybrid situation? Like, how long do you think that we need to wait for that clarification from either FEMA or the state?
Well, to understand the deadline, so is it late October? I can't remember offhand, is
It
when
is.
your current plan expires.
Yes, it is
Okay.
late October.
Well, something magical doesn't happen on that date.
No.
It's not like you're going to get penalized. Where you've got concerns is if the county or municipality wants to go after a grant program for which this is a prerequisite. We know that state pre-disaster flood resiliency grant program last year had a deadline in November. So if someone wants to go after that grant program, and if the state doesn't say, we're going to waive that mitigation plan requirement this year due to this chaos that's going on right now with the programs, then they'd be in a bind. And so that's, to me, that's the key one. The other would be if there's someone going after HMGP due to a disaster declaration that falls after after your plan expires, there's a lot more flexibility there. Otherwise, if the brick, we just don't know what they're going to do with the brick. Is this new mitigation approach? In the past, the brick deadlines have been early in the year, so you'd have flexibility there. So I can't tell you for sure. We can expedite quite a bit, but you still got certain parts of that process you need to go through, such as gathering everything together and then adopting it locally. So there is an adoption. So you've got that public noticing. And
I think if I went back 5 years and looked at when we adopted it, I think it actually did not get adopted until like the January meeting. But if you look at our paperwork, it ends in October. So I can do some checking on that to see, when we have to have it officially adopted, or if it's, what the requirement is on that. I just don't want us to wait until like August and then decide, oh, no, we don't have. So do you think that next meeting in May, if we haven't heard, that we should make a decision on one of those options, like move on and don't do it, move on ourselves and try it, or do it like a hybrid, hiring you guys to do it? Do you think that would be a good decision?
If you don't want to take that risk for that November, probably, yeah, for that November flood resiliency grant.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's the
only one that would affect us.
Yeah, that's the trigger right now. That's why we wanted to get this done by the end of October, is in case someone was going to go after that grant dollars. If there is no intent by any city, village, county to go after those grant dollars, then you've got a few more months, but you don't know, we'd have to pull.
We don't even know what the requirements of those grant is at this time.
Right.
Okay. Well, we can do some homework on our end and reach out to some of the townships and villages and just say, hey, this grant is normally available in November. Were you looking at applying for something? And if everyone is a no, then it does buy us a little more time.
Sure. And I put together, at least last year, kind of a summary for that program, so I can share that with you and
Okay.
the folks aware. Yeah, well, I canceled that because this is on hold. The project's on hold. I was on the towns. We were getting ready, so I was on Towns Association to make a presentation. We got the town survey all prepared, and now we just shut it down. We didn't want to incur too many costs.
Any questions?
So if I hear this right, we're no longer have I assume Brick paid us to do these reports, right? And now we have nobody paying us that we know of, maybe the state for some part of it. We're trying, do we have any idea how much would a reduced report cost and who would pay for it? What would be the likelihood of getting the money back in grants?
If FEMA doesn't, I guess what I want to say. So if they don't recognize the fact that we have those dollars already approved, so they claw back the grant we do have, right? And if the state can't find any other mitigation dollars, HMGP in particular, then chances are you're not going to have any grant dollars to help you with the costs. I don't know how much it will cost, what our reduced rate would be, because we're still hoping this goes through. We haven't sat down and put together a proposal, and so we need to do that. So I really can't answer that tonight. I know there's economies to be had, because the proposal or the project we've got right now includes quite a bit of, I'm meeting with each city and village. I'm doing the Towns Association meeting tonight supposedly, or I was. So there was a lot of public input. There was a lot of meetings. It was time to sit down with different staff. We can cut back quite a bit and look for some economies. So I would know that for your May meeting though, if we don't hear from Wem first.
Yeah, and I think that when we had our meeting and Luke and Chris and Dan and I talked about, is it a possibility that our office could help out and do some of those meetings to kind of reduce some of that cost that we would have, or could we host a public meeting and invite all the townships into one meeting versus run to every one of their town board meetings, which takes a lot of time and a lot of effort on Chris's part. So I think there are things that we can do to kind of shape this a little bit easier for us to accomplish, both financially and in our time constraints. But he seems to be a little bit more hopeful that it's going to go through than I was originally. When I've got received the emails, it's been kind of like, this is really not going to go anywhere. The only hope that I had was that this project started honestly back in 23. And like he said, the applications that went in this spring were completely denied. And we did have an application that went in this spring that was completely denied. So at least we know where we're at with that, I guess, is how we could look at it.
Yeah, your funds were fully obligated. And it was that unless have not started construction, they'd recognize and allow the projects to proceed and allow you to draw down all those dollars is what we were told. That was on April 16th. But it's not, FEMA's supposed to come out with a list of exactly what is going to get approved and what isn't. And we're waiting for that list to drop.
But
My son, he used to write hazard mitigation projects for an adjacent group at Mississippi River. And his reaction to the cancellation of the BRIC program was that it was a good thing because he didn't find it to be a very meaningful process. He thought he was just kind of checking off points for the process, which leads to my question, which is, has doing this not only satisfied FEMA, has it done us some good as a county in thinking about what hazards we face and what we can do economically to address them?
I think that's an excellent point, and that yeah, it does make you wonder, are we just going through the motions, basically checking off a list that FEMA has given to us to do? We did have one successful grant, which he mentioned, and I also put in the written report, that was for the Chippewa River Bank that was approved. We did have another application in there hoping for approval, but now that has been taken back. A lot of it, like he mentioned, it does kind of fall back on the townships or the villages too for opportunities to take advantage of this grant program. But if Dunn County doesn't write that hazard mitigation plan, and then the village of Colfax wants to move forward with it, whatever their mitigation plan is, then, they're not eligible, if we don't have that plan. So, and I think a lot of times is maybe some of this paperwork that we get, it really doesn't always bring to the surface like an exact project. Yes, we know that, severe storms are an issue in Dunn County. That's definitely way more than landslides. But in the end, we haven't had a lot of major situations. Barron County, for example, that tornado that went through in May, a couple, 3 years ago, at that trailer park by Chautauqua. They now have a safe shelter or storm shelter there because of this plan. So a call that I took as I walked out of my office, I heard my phone ringing, so I went back in, and it was a young lady, and she said, I just moved to Dunn County, and I just wondered where your storm shelter was, and if you would be opening it tonight for the storms. And I said, well, it depends on where you live and what's accessible. And she said, I live in the Birch Terrace trailer court, and I just moved here a couple months ago, and so I'm really not familiar with the area. And I said, I'm really sorry, we don't have one specific in your area for that. So that would be something that really could be listed as a specific, but then I think the Township of Menominee would have to participate with us because it would be their grant and we'd be like just assisting them. Is that correct?
Or you would pass through the dollars,
Mhm.
you
Right.
can fund private safe rooms.
Yep.
I mean, it wouldn't necessarily have to be a public.
So sometimes I don't think it's all the burden falls just on the emergency management office. There's a lot of coordination with like the townships and different things like that. And some of these grants that come out, I mean, they're rough. They give you like a week or two to apply for
Mhm.
them, and you have to have all these quotes about what it would cost. Well, if you don't have that plan already in mind and ready for that grant to open, I mean, you can't get a quote from a construction company for a safe room that's going to house 125 people overnight. So I think that in the past, maybe we haven't been as prepared as we should have been when these grants come out. Like the townships really don't move forward some of that concern that comes out of this. They adopt it, they go through the motions, but maybe they're not as vested in it, should I say? If that helps, Carl.
Yeah, it's what the communities and the counties also make out of it, So like I said, we've gotten, I think we're around, what I have here, $360,000 I brought, through this program brought into Dunn County. However, for a region, we brought in 18.8 million. And so there's other counties that have done quite a bit more with these funds than others. More recently, I've had emergency managers also using this planning process to help inform their integrated preparedness plans, their training programs and such, because there's not a bright line between mitigation and preparedness. And so the act of sitting down with the communities, is your emergency operations plan up to date? And where's your debris management site? And do you have public works mutual aid in place? And asking these questions is getting them. It's many times the only time they have every 5 years to sit down and think about these kind of preparedness things that are a little bit beyond just typical mitigation. And so that's been a real positive that I've seen come out of this too.
And I think that, if you look at Dunn County as a whole, I mean, we have, maybe we're fortunate enough that we have not had some of these situations that have needed some of these mitigation dollars. Like our Chippewa River, it does have a few areas of concern, but that is way different than the concern of the Chippewa River in Pepin County. They have some major flooding down there, and Dunn County just doesn't have that, which is a good thing, So, I mean, it just, you have to look at some of that too, is that doesn't, safe rooms, I think, are probably the biggest and most important in my mind. But that's just, my opinion. That would be what comes out of this.
Unless you have flood projects, that's the number one in our county or in our region. And the third is those burying of those power lines. So if the co-op has those kind of projects, that's the other one. Just a ninth deadliest tornado in U.S. history. Anyone know where that was?
Colfax.
No.
Oh.
Ninth deadliest tornado in U.S. history. 1899. Carnival was in town. New Richmond. 60 years later, or 50 years later, Colfax. Now we're 60 years beyond that. So our region's kind of due for another biggie. If we follow those trends there. So, yeah. Anyway.
Well, thank you, Chris. Oh,
Quick question.
Yep.
we talking money for the plan or money for the action that the plan would initiate? Like is this money for the shelter or money that for the plan? You know what I mean?
It would be for the
Just for
plan.
Plan, so.
Yep. So we need to complete the plan to be eligible for possibly any of those grants that would be out there for like shelters or, mitigation projects on the river.
How does a plan cost that much money?
Well,
Where
I
does
mean,
money go in a plan?
so we pay Chris's organization to do the work for that 500 or 800 page plan.
It's that
So-
15-page checklist of FEMA,
Sure.
and I wish they would cut back some of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So probably going in the past, I can only speak to what we've done in the past. So they would go to each individual township meeting. 22 townships to their town meeting and do a presentation similar to this. Meet with the villages individually, meet with Stout, Menominee, the city of Menominee, come to 2 or 3 of these meetings. I know there's some FEMA checklists about hazard material or things that have to be done also to meet that checklist. So I think that's what they do. I don't know, I guess, the exact dollar amount or what it costs per trip to, whatever. But yeah, basically that is what the system has done in the past. And I think it's done pretty much that way statewide.
Yeah, we meet with each city and village. I meet with the university. I meet with key stakeholders. I do a presentation to the Towns Association, but we do a survey to the towns, and I don't meet with every town unless they have a project in mind. And so if a town of Menominee wants to explore safe rooms and want me to come out to a town board meeting, I'll do that.
So most of the money that comes in for the plan goes to the organization?
Mhm.
Not, okay.
Right. And then we use your time like tonight and the time through those interviews and those meetings to cover the grant match. So there's no cash out of pocket to update the plan for you folks.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Carl.
Is there kind of a choice here between, I mean, when you talk about like, safety, rooms for like shelters, that's a nice focused kind of thing that we can think of and say, okay, we have a high enough probability of tornadoes. We really should encourage those and look, here's some money, available that we could probably apply for.
Mhm.
So we could do a much smaller, more targeted grant application there. When I look at this list, my gosh, the last time I did this, I was bothered that I filled out these things, put numbers on them, but I didn't know what I was talking about. I don't have a background, a little bit in some, a sense that some things are getting more serious. I looked into long-term power outages at the time and found out that a high-level nuclear explosion will really mess up the power grid and that sunstorms can, which we haven't had to that level of seriousness, but they've become more serious, could really mess up the power grid. And boy, that would be a huge problem. And so, that might be worth researching and thinking about. Do gas stations have backup power of some kind that would allow people with generators to buy gas? Otherwise, the generators eventually aren't of much value either. And I'll tell you right now, with some of the cuts the federal government is making to the weather reporting system, to firefighters, of wildfires, to to our health program. I think we're less prepared for pandemics. They've fired some of the people who are leaders in cyber attacks. So my sense is that horrible things can happen. Scale is pretty high right now. So, but I don't know where to begin.
And I think too, Carl, you're right in that, maybe you didn't understand or how to fill it out or didn't, and I think too is every board is different, and the knowledge of every board, the background of every person on this board is different. And so every time we go through this, and I've been through this several times every 5 years, is everyone has a different priority. And so it basically ends up to be what you have as knowledge or what your background is what you feel is important. Same thing with the townships. I mean, if, let's just say that there's some really kicked back people that are on the town boards, and they're like, yeah, I just don't think any of this is really that big of a deal. And I'm not concerned about sunstorms interrupting our power. It does not become a priority. And so maybe that's why some of our plans haven't come to fruition with a lot of safe rooms. And I've said this before, and I will say it again, but with caution, is Dunn County has some fairly resilient residents. If something happens, if a storm hits a certain area of the county, I think the other residents take care of them, or they help out, or they volunteer, come stay at my house if you don't have a basement, that type of thing. And so then maybe it does not bring to the surface some of the projects that are, important in other counties, is because I think this is all based on basically almost personal information and personal opinion. And, if we all sit on this, board and we say, nah, it's just really not a big deal. I think even the severe thunderstorms we have are not that big of a deal, then we're not going to come up with the projects to apply the grants for. So I think maybe that is a little bit difference too, is every board, this is really a completely different board than we had 5 years ago. So their priorities might be completely different, as the county board is completely different, as the county administration is different. So I think it really ebbs and flows with who's on the board and what priorities are put on different things.
Yeah, and this exercise in part is to help me justify not spending time on fog or earthquakes. Because my board, the steering committee said this was not a priority for us. So you're helping me choose by filling this out, using your gut reaction. And if originally how this was supposed to work is I would have presented data for these different hazards and talk through a little bit more, like I talked through 2.2 tornadoes per year, right? Or 5 to 6 severe thunderstorm events. But I just couldn't spend much time prepping for tonight because of the budget issue or the grant issue. But so if you just use your gut reaction, and then we get into the process and some other cream rises to the top, and you want to spend your time talking about landslides, we'll cover that. I will note that for the first time, Eau Claire County, under their long-term power outage section, we've got a subsection on solar storms. So, and that's how these plans grow, and become so big, as we start delving into these threats.
I take your point, Melissa. I was thinking a while ago the same thing. Don has had experience in government. I'd be very curious, how that's relevant here. Agnes has a medical background, and that would be useful in this discussion. But I don't really agree. I don't think it's personal opinion very much. It's experience, it's judgment, but it's also, these are matters more of expertise. We'd have to do research, and if it's important to do, I wouldn't mind doing a research on some of these and hearing what some of you know and what you've learned about some of these and bring that together. But whether it's important to do all that work if there's no support for the BRIC program or not really much payoff for it, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, well, I think, maybe we'll just wait to see what the next few weeks bring us. And I think exactly what you just said. If you're willing to put in the time, if you want to put in the time to research, I think that only offers a lot more validity to our plan. You know, if we've done the research, if we use, you know, Don as, you know, an expert to kind of bolster some of our ideas. And I can't speak for other committees in the past when we've worked on this, but, you know, maybe they didn't feel that it warranted that type of extra research, or we didn't have that kind of expert opinions on the board. So yeah, I think that we just kind of maybe have to wait and see what comes up, and then yeah, think about it. I mean, maybe you go back to your statement that your son really didn't think it was really that big of a deal to have this plan because it was not beneficial. Maybe that's the opinion. Maybe that's what we do. Maybe that's a decision that needs to be made. And maybe, you know, if we feel that way, or we feel 50,000 is too much to pay a company to write the plan for us, well, then we change that up and we do something different.
Yeah, won't be 50,000 anyway. Yeah, but yeah, just personal opinion, probably the wrong phrase, but your knowledge, your expertise. And if you want to hold off on doing that for now and we do that later as part of a process, that's fine too. And I can bring the data in and then you can do that homework assignment. So if you want, that's fine too. So I thought I'd hand it out because it was already ready. But we're flexible.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
We'll move on to consideration of actions to be taken by the Judicial Law Committee. And this is the discussion portion. So when Melissa and Dan and Chris and I met, we kind of had four options that we talked about. And so option one was we just do nothing right now. Option two, the county can fund it. Option three was a hybrid model. So maybe we have them do some and we do some. And then option four was we do it all ourselves. So those are the four options we discuss. I don't know if you want to talk more about it.
When you said we do it all ourselves, what exactly are you talking about? The mitigation plan?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So that document, which I think you can find on our website if you want to take a look at it. So it would be that document, and, you know, we did take a look at it, and there are some cookie cutter things in there that can just be updated. But a lot of it is like information gathering and then, you know, basically compiling that. And, you know, that definitely would take some staff time, and we'd have to take a look at that and have to, you know, look at priorities and look at what we might need to change in priorities. So yeah, I think that, you know, the only other thing that maybe we could do is if we do want to have this funded, or if we want to pay for it, if the grant is not going to come through, is we could modify it to, instead of an all hazard, just do natural hazard, which might change the scope of the project a little tiny bit, but not greatly.
Dan, do you have, when would we have to decide? Like, say we decide we want to fund it. When would we have to decide that for county budget?
So you kind of have to. I was actually just trying to look it up, but I didn't get the number. The way it's agendaed today, this is just within your committee, so you couldn't actually put through a budget adjustment, which is ultimately what it would be, is a budget adjustment to utilize fund balance to be able to do that. The other option would be to make a request for contingency funds, which would go to the Committee on Administration. And then the Committee on Administration makes that determination. My thought right now, just because, I mean, this is funding that's been pulled back, and we expect more of that to potentially happen. So I think we need to be careful about what we throw at the contingency fund in April, since there's a whole year left. So that would be the thought. So you could kind of make the determination that you want to do that today, but it would have to be agended again in May, which would then go to the June board meeting unless you scheduled something on like May 13th to to get that in ahead of the executive committee.
Well, just so like the option I like right now is do nothing. But if
You don't have to do anything to do
right,
that.
no, but I'm just saying, so like, but let's say 2 months from now, we feel like we want to change our mind.
Yeah,
Is that too
so
late? I mean,
no, I mean I mean the latest you would be able to go would be like November,
oh, okay.
well, because we don't have a board meeting in December, so but the plan is done in October, and so I think some of that is if you want to get that done in October, well, and you're going to pay them to do that, Chris is going to need a little bit of time to to get that work done, and so that's what I was hearing. Like probably he would need to know in June, which would mean he would need like July, August, September to actually do the work. So, but there's nothing stopping if that plan expires in October to write a plan and have it effective January 1. So, other than that 3-month window, and I know you talked about the one potential grant at the end of the year.
And we are talking about money for a plan, not action, not if we as a board feel that there's something that is a imminent threat of sorts, storm shelters, what have you, I mean, can't we just do that without paying somebody, no offense, to do a plan? I mean, I don't know how much we've spent on the plan over the years, but we probably could have built a shelter.
Yeah. How much was that shelter in Eau Claire that you just built?
Depending on its size, but
Yeah. 1.8 million. So, let's just say we were gonna do a shelter right outside the Birch Terrace. So let's say maybe it's not gonna be 1.8, let's just go with 1 million. You know, the plans, and I can't speak to exactly how much, we've paid, but it's been, 30,000, every 5 years. So not a terrible amount. And I think we did have a $300,000 project or something. But, if we want grant funding for that shelter from FEMA, we have to have the plan.
get the
Yep.
grant, right,
Yep,
for the project itself.
for the project itself.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Yep. It's really kind of like he said, the carrot, they dangle that carrot saying, oh, well, we'll give you money. We'll give you money to build a shelter, but you have to do this or you're not even eligible. And we still could apply and get denied and say, nope, I'm sorry, your project's not a priority. It's just,
We could have a more narrow plan that was easier to write, I would assume. I mean, if we narrowed down the scope of what we were trying to do.
yep, we'd have to take a look at those 15 things and just make sure we're making sure we're meeting those requirements. And then from there, we could definitely scale it down if we've met those actual requirements. Yep. Yep.
I'm just always leery of over administrating something, and time and effort and money is spent on a lot of talking and not doing. So
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand. And like I said, I went back as far as 2005, so every 5 years we've written this plan, and I'm sure back then it was, maybe not as lengthy as it is now because there were some things that were probably not in there, like cyber attacks and things like that. So, it probably was a little bit smaller back then and a little less work, but I think it's right around that 30,000 that we paid 5 years ago.
I personally, in relation to like what Tom said too, I value what Melissa has to say, looking at this maybe in a month or, what would you think would be the best way to spend some time and money to put us in a better place, for the other kinds of hazards we face. Given that right now we don't know much about brick.
I kind of like Luke's idea of not doing anything right now simply because, as we've seen with lots of things that the administration is doing right now, who knows? You know, that could change. And, you know, in this report, you said it remains unclear what role hazard mitigation plans will hold in the future. So we're kind of at a spot where we don't really know.
Yeah,
First of all, what's going to be required, and if that whole, you know, if that brick grant is gone.
right.
Totally.
We may either spend a lot of Dunn County time writing one or spend money having Chris write it, only to find out there's no grants to write because that funding has been pulled back. Yeah, we're really in kind of a interesting spot.
Yeah, I think.
It feels like, you know, yeah, I think tabling it for a month and not doing anything. And then we can pick up the discussion in May, or I can at least put it in my report. So there's, some information. But yeah, I think that it's one of those things that's a really unique situation in that we can do absolutely nothing and not have a plan. And that's fine. I just don't want, all of a sudden all this funding to come out in November and them say, oh yeah, you can go ahead and apply for that safe shelter down by Birch Terrace, but we don't have a plan. So now Dunn County's not eligible because that would not be good.
Is this separate from like our emergency operations plan?
Yes, it is.
So that plan doesn't count for the grants to having that
No,
plan in place?
nope.
That's
They're,
bureaucracy.
oh yeah, it is.
That's what this all,
It is.
conversation is actually just administration and bureaucracy.
It is. The last hour, that's exactly what it's been about.
Yes, somebody should have just built a concrete box. It would
Yeah.
have been done a long time.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
100%. 100%. But that, I mean, unfortunately, I don't want to get too political, but I mean, that's what the federal government is probably known for, is that kind of bureaucracy,
well,
is just,
which is maybe the bright side of cutting some of this.
yeah,
I think you have to empty a garage to clean it, to
Yeah.
rebuild it.
yeah. So hopefully we are, it's just, we're caught in the middle right now in this minute. I think had this happened, 6 months from now, it would have been all done and it would have all been taken care of but we're in a spot and I feel like it's a hard decision. Just do we not do a plan and we see and wait it out and maybe build our own storm shelter or, do whatever, figure that out. But it feels like I don't want to make the decision to say, no, we're not going to do a hazard mitigation plan. We're just not going to do it. And then 4 months from now, the Township of Menominee says, where's our grant funding available for our shelter? And we're like, we're sorry, we're not eligible because we chose not to do a plan. That's just a decision. I don't even think I can make that decision myself,
And
but it's a
that's just for
decision I don't want
FEMA
to.
grants.
Right. But a lot of the money that comes from the state comes through the federal government.
See how FEMA has spent money in the last couple of years.
So we have a plan.
We currently do, yeah.
Is there an expiration date?
Yep, I think it is like, I want to say October 25th. Something like that rings a bell.
I liked your comment about cookie cuttering.
Mhm.
Because I'm not big on reinventing the wheel on a lot of things. And if it's cutting and pasting and just coming up with some new ideas in there, and saying that this is our new plan,
And I think that, Chris did allude to that a little bit, is we can streamline it so it is, one, less expensive to finish and yet still makes us eligible. I think that definitely is an option. Just to streamline it a little bit. I think the plan is what you make it and how, it's what you make it. And if we opt not to have it 900 pages, that's our option. That we still want these things highlighted, but it doesn't necessarily need to be 900 pages.
But to be eligible for the grants, you would still need to
Meet those 15
meet
requirements.
those
Yep.
15 requirements. So there would be that.
Yep, absolutely.
Couldn't that be 15 pages?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. It's 15 pages of requirements, not just 50, so, and those are guidelines that FEMA adopted last year. So there's new plan guidance out that your current plan, as it sits today, we couldn't just update numbers because there's things missing in it. So just so yes, there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. In fact, I wish these were only need to be updated every 10 years rather than every 5 years. That'd be one thing I'd recommend. But it is what it is. So.
Thank you, Chris. I guess at this time, I'll make a motion to table this at the time. Well,
Nice, second.
I don't get to make a motion. Never mind. Carl makes a motion.
I'll second.
And Don seconds. All in favor, say aye. Motion passes. We'll table it for now. Thank you.
Yeah, he's the tiebreaker, actually, yeah.
Number 8, thanks for hanging in with us, Sheriff. Consideration of reports, resolutions, and ordinance to the County Board from the Judicial Law Committee. Number A, Sheriff's Office Budget Adjustment Request for First Responder Grant.
Yeah, the director of my first responder program submitted a grant application and was awarded the $12,398.08 grant. I'm not sure why that number. If they had a pot of money and so many people put in for it and they divided it equally, I have no clue how they came up with that number, but that would be for equipment for the first responder program. So it's not heavily funded through a budget process.
And do we need a motion on this, Dan? Do I have a motion?
You do?
Yep.
Second.
Motion by Tom Gilbert, second by Don Judson. All in favor, aye. Aye. Motion passes. Number 9, announcements, none. Number 10, next meeting, May 19th, 2025 at 4:30. And we are adjourned.